Chapter 1: The Wreckage. The storm had passed, leaving a trail of splintered wood and broken dreams in its wake. Marius, gripping a piece of driftwood, coughed seawater. The sea serpent was gone, swallowed by the tempest's fury. Around him, debris bobbed like mournful confetti: a shattered mast, a tattered sail, a crate of oranges slowly sinking. The air hung heavy with the stench of salt and despair. He scanned the horizon, a churning canvas of gray. Several others clung to wreckage. He recognized Isabella Rossi, her face pale but determined. Tommy Davies, the young sailor, trembled, his eyes wide with shock. Blackwood, the reverend, muttered prayers, his face buried in his hands. Alistair, though battered, moved with purpose. He pulled himself onto a larger piece of the ship's hull, offering a hand to Isabella. "We need to find land," he yelled, his voice raspy. "Keep an eye out." Hours crawled. The sun, a weak and watery disk, offered little warmth. Hope dwindled with each passing wave. A cry erupted from Tommy. "Land, I see land." A sliver of green, shrouded in mist, appeared on the horizon. The sight spurred them onward, their weary limbs finding new strength. As they drew closer, the island resolved itself from the fog. It was small, no more than a mile across, with jagged cliffs and a dense forest that seemed to press against the shore. An eerie silence hung over it, broken only by the cries of gulls. Getting ashore proved treacherous. The waves crashed against the rocks, threatening to smash them against the unforgiving stone. Marius helped Isabella navigate the treacherous rocks, her strong grip surprising him. They pulled Tommy to shore, his youthful enthusiasm replaced by a grim determination. Blackwood stumbled, his prayers faltering. Once on the beach, they collapsed, exhausted. The sand was black, volcanic in origin, and felt strangely warm beneath their bodies. Isabella, ever the pragmatist, assessed their situation. "We need water, shelter, and to take stock of what we salvaged." They searched the wreckage that washed ashore, salvaging what they could. A few barrels of fresh water miraculously intact. Some blankets, soaked but usable. A crate of salted pork. A box of medical supplies which Isabella quickly claimed. As dusk approached, they found a small cave, sheltered from the wind. It was damp and smelled of seaweed, but it offered a degree of protection. They huddled together, sharing the meager rations. The Reverend offered a prayer of thanks, his voice regaining some of its conviction. Marius stood guard at the cave entrance. The moon, full and bright, cast an ethereal glow over the island. The forest seemed to writhe in the shadows, its trees twisted into grotesque shapes. An unnatural stillness permeated the air. A sound broke the silence, a haunting melody, carried on the wind. It was beautiful, alluring, yet laced with an undercurrent of sorrow. Tommy, stirred from his slumber, moved towards the sound, a glazed, distant look in his eyes. "Tommy, stop," Marius commanded, but the young sailor didn't respond. He walked as if in a trance, drawn by the siren's call. Marius grabbed him, shaking him roughly. "Tommy, wake up. This is not right." Tommy blinked, his eyes clearing. I don't know what happened," he stammered, clutching his head. "I just heard this song." The music faded, leaving an unsettling silence. Marius exchanged uneasy looks with Isabella and the others. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this island was not what it seemed. The storm might have wrecked their ship, but the island held dangers far greater than the sea. Chapter 2: The Islanders. Sleep offered little respite. Nightmares plagued Marius' visions of drowning, of monstrous figures rising from the depths, of Tommy's vacant eyes. He awoke before dawn, the siren's song still echoing in his mind. The others stirred, their faces etched with fatigue. Isabella examined Tommy, checking his pulse and reflexes. "He seems fine," she said, her voice laced with concern. "But something definitely affected him. We need to be careful." They decided to explore the island, hopping to find a source of fresh water and a more permanent shelter. Marius, Isabella, and Blackwood ventured inland, leaving Maggie and Nate to guard the cave and Tommy to recover. The forest was dense and oppressive, the air thick with humidity. Strange plants grew in abundance, luminous fungi, vines that seemed to writhe and pulsate, flowers with an unsettlingly sweet scent. The ground was soft and spongy, as if walking on a living thing. As they pressed deeper, they came across a clearing. In the center stood a village, or what remained of one. The huts were dilapidated, their thatched roofs rotting, their walls covered in moss. An eerie silence hung over the place, broken only by the rustling of leaves. "Hello," Marius called out, his voice echoing through the deserted village. "Is anyone there?" A figure emerged from one of the huts, an old man, gaunt and pale, with eyes that seemed to pierce through them. He wore tattered clothes and carried a gnarled staff. Behind him, others appeared, men, women, and children, all with the same vacant expression and unsettling stillness. "Welcome," the old man said, his voice raspy but strangely hypnotic. "We have been waiting for you." Marius exchanged wary glances with Isabella and Blackwood. "Who are you?" he asked. "What is this place?" "We are the people of this island," the old man replied. "We have lived here for many years. We offer you shelter and hospitality." Despite their reservations, they accepted the offer. The islanders led them to one of the huts, which, while dilapidated, provided a degree of comfort. They offered them food, a bland, tasteless stew made from unknown ingredients. As they ate, Marius studied the islanders. They moved with an unnatural grace, their eyes never blinking, their faces devoid of emotion. There was something unsettling about them, something not quite human. Isabella, ever observant, noticed a strange symbol carved into the walls of the hut, a circle with a spiral inside, radiating outwards. "What is this symbol?" she asked the old man. "It is a sign of our faith," he replied, his eyes glinting. "It represents the Siren, the guardian of this island." "The Siren?" Blackwood asked, his voice trembling. "The creature from the sea?" The old man nodded. "She protects us, provides for us. In return, we offer her our devotion." Marius felt a chill run down his spine. He realized that these islanders were not offering them hospitality out of kindness. They were part of something far more sinister, something connected to the haunting melody and the strange influence that had gripped Tommy. As night fell, the islanders gathered in the center of the village. They began to chant, their voices rising in a hypnotic drone. The symbol on the walls seemed to glow with an eerie light. Marius knew they had to escape, but how could they escape an island surrounded by water, an island whose inhabitants were in thrall to a deadly siren? The answer, he suspected, lay in the secrets of this place, secrets he was determined to uncover. Chapter 3: The Lagoon's Secret. Marius couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even inside the hut, the eyes of the islanders seemed to follow him, their gaze unnervingly blank. He pretended to sleep, waiting for an opportunity to investigate. Once the chanting reached a fever pitch and the islanders seemed completely entranced, he nudged Isabella awake. Blackwood, his face pale with fear, was already stirring. "We need to leave," Marius whispered. "Now." They slipped out of the hut, moving silently through the village. The chanting grew louder, the air vibrating with an unnatural energy. The symbol on the huts pulsed with a sickly green light. They headed towards the center of the island, drawn by an invisible force. As they approached, they saw a clearing bathed in moonlight. In the center lay a lagoon, its water shimmering with an ethereal glow. The chanting islanders surrounded the lagoon, their arms raised in supplication. In the water, a figure began to rise, a woman of breathtaking beauty, with long, flowing hair and skin that shimmered like pearls. Her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. The Siren. Her voice, amplified by the lagoon, filled the air with its haunting melody. It was a song of sorrow, of longing, of irresistible allure. Marius felt himself drawn to her, his mind clouding, his will weakening. Isabella grabbed his arm, shaking him roughly. "Marius, snap out of it," she shouted. "She's controlling you." He blinked, his mind clearing slightly. The siren's song still resonated within him, but he was able to resist its pull. He saw Blackwood, his face contorted in a mixture of fear and fascination, edging towards the lagoon. "Blackwood, no," Marius yelled. The Reverend didn't respond. He waded into the water, his eyes fixed on the siren. She smiled, a chillingly beautiful expression that promised both ecstasy and oblivion. As Blackwood reached the siren, she reached out and touched his forehead. His body convulsed, his eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed into the water. The siren pulled him beneath the surface, and the lagoon turned a disturbing shade of crimson. Marius and Isabella stared in horror. They knew they had to escape, but they were surrounded by the chanting islanders, their faces blank and unreadable. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the forest, Maggie, the cook, wielding a heavy cleaver. "Get out of here," she shouted, charging towards the islanders. "I'll hold them off." Marius and Isabella hesitated, but Maggie's fierce determination spurred them into action. They ran towards the forest, dodging the entranced islanders. Maggie fought bravely, but she was outnumbered. They saw her fall, overwhelmed by the chanting throng. Guilt gnawed at Marius, but he knew they couldn't go back. They had to escape the island and warn others about the siren's deadly power. They plunged into the forest, the siren's song echoing in their ears. The island itself seemed to conspire against them, the trees twisting and turning, the vines snaring their feet. As they stumbled through the darkness, they came across a cave, a dark, gaping maw in the earth. They had no idea what lay inside, but it offered a chance to escape the chanting islanders and the Siren's deadly influence. With a shared glance, they plunged into the darkness. Chapter 4: The Caves of Despair. The darkness within the cave was absolute, broken only by the faint moonlight filtering through the entrance. The air was cold and damp, carrying the scent of mildew and something else, something ancient and unsettling. Marius fumbled for a torch, thankful that they had salvaged a few from the wreckage. He lit it, casting a flickering circle of light that revealed the cave's interior. The walls were slick with moisture, covered in strange formations that resembled grotesque faces. Water dripped from the ceiling, creating an eerie echo. "This place gives me the creeps," Isabella muttered, her voice hushed. They ventured deeper into the cave, the torchlight revealing a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the sound of their own footsteps and the occasional drip of water. As they progressed, they came across strange carvings on the walls, depictions of the Siren, of the islanders performing rituals, of monstrous figures rising from the sea. The carvings told a story of ancient worship, of a pact made with a dark and powerful entity. They also found bones, human bones, scattered across the cave floor. Some were old and weathered, others were disturbingly fresh. Marius realized that this cave was not just a refuge, it was a charnel house, a testament to the Siren's deadly power. Suddenly they heard a sound, a low, guttural growl, echoing from the depths of the cave. They froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. "What was that?" Isabella whispered. Marius raised the torch, scanning the darkness. Two glowing eyes appeared in the distance, followed by a hulking figure that emerged from the shadows. It was the drowned man, Peter, the sailor who had been lost in the storm, now transformed into a monstrous creature. His skin was bloated and green, covered in seaweed and barnacles. His eyes were milky white, devoid of any humanity. He lunged at them, his arms outstretched, his mouth agape, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Marius raised his sword, prepared to defend himself. "We don't want to hurt you, Peter," he shouted, hopping to reach some spark of humanity within the creature. But the drowned man didn't respond. He attacked with savage ferocity, his movements surprisingly quick. Marius parried his blows, struggling to maintain his footing on the slippery cave floor. Isabella grabbed a rock and hurled it at the drowned man, hitting him in the head. The creature staggered, giving Marius an opening. He thrust his sword forward, piercing the drowned man's chest. The creature roared in pain, its body convulsing. It stumbled backwards, its eyes fixed on Marius, before collapsing to the ground. Marius and Isabella stared at the drowned man's lifeless body, their chests heaving. They knew that this was just one of the many horrors that awaited them on this cursed island. They continued their journey through the cave, their resolve strengthened by the encounter. They had to find a way to escape, not just for their own survival, but to stop the Siren from claiming more victims. As they rounded a corner, they saw a light in the distance, not the flickering light of their torch, but a steady, ethereal glow. They quickened their pace, drawn towards the light, hoping that it would lead them to a way out of this subterranean nightmare. Chapter 5: The Siren's Grotto. The light grew stronger as they advanced, revealing a vast cavern bathed in an otherworldly luminescence. The source of the light was a pool of water, fed by a subterranean spring. The water glowed with an ethereal blue light, illuminating the cavern's walls, which were covered in shimmering crystals. In the center of the pool, a small island rose from the water. On the island, surrounded by the glowing water, stood a figure, the Siren. She was even more beautiful up close than Marius had imagined. Her skin shimmered like moonlight on water, her hair flowed like liquid silk, and her eyes held a captivating power. She smiled, a seductive expression that promised both pleasure and oblivion. "Welcome, Marius," she said, her voice a melodic whisper that resonated through the cavern. "I have been expecting you." Marius gripped his sword, his hand trembling. He knew that he was in the presence of a powerful and dangerous being. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I want you to join me," the Siren replied, "to become one with this island, to share in its power and beauty." "I will never serve you," Marius said, his voice firm. "You are a monster preying on innocent people." The Siren's smile faded, replaced by an expression of cold fury. "You dare defy me," she hissed. "You are nothing but a mortal, insignificant and weak." She raised her hand, and the water in the pool began to churn. The crystals on the walls pulsed with an eerie light. The cavern shook, as if the island itself was responding to her anger. "I will show you my power," she said. "I will show you what awaits those who resist me." From the depths of the pool, figures began to emerge, the deep ones, grotesque amphibious creatures with bulging eyes and razor-sharp claws. They surrounded Marius and Isabella, their eyes fixed on them with predatory hunger. "Kill them," the Siren commanded. The deep ones lunged, their claws tearing at Marius and Isabella's clothes. Marius fought bravely, his sword flashing in the ethereal light. Isabella used her medical skills to defend herself, striking at the creatures' vulnerable points with sharp stones. But they were outnumbered. The deep ones swarmed them, overwhelming their defenses. Marius felt a sharp pain in his arm as a deep one's claw pierced his flesh. He staggered backwards, his vision blurring. Isabella screamed as a deep one dragged her towards the pool. The Siren smiled, her eyes glowing with triumph. Just when all hope seemed lost, a figure emerged from the shadows, Nathaniel, the fisherman, wielding a makeshift club. He charged into the fray, swinging his club with surprising force. "Get away from her," he roared, smashing a deep one in the head. Nathaniel fought with a ferocity that surprised Marius. He seemed to be driven by a burning rage, fueled by some unknown pain. He cleared a path to Isabella, pulling her away from the pool. "Run," he shouted. "I'll hold them off." Marius hesitated, but Nathaniel's determined gaze spurred him into action. He grabbed Isabella's hand and ran towards a narrow passage that led out of the cavern. They fled through the passage, the sounds of battle echoing behind them. They had no idea where they were going, but they knew they had to escape the Siren's clutches. As they ran, Marius realized that Nathaniel's arrival was no coincidence. He had a feeling that the fishermen held a secret, a connection to the island and its dark history. He just hoped they could survive long enough to uncover it. Chapter 6: The Fisherman's Tale. The passage led them upwards, winding through a series of narrow tunnels. The air grew warmer, and they could hear the sound of waves crashing against the shore. They emerged from the cave onto a rocky cliff overlooking the sea. They collapsed, exhausted, catching their breath. Isabella examined Marius's wound, cleaning it with some salvaged bandages. "That was too close," she said, her voice trembling. "We need to get off this island." "I know," Marius replied, "but how? The Siren controls everything here." Just then Nathaniel emerged from the cave entrance, his face bruised and bloodied. He carried his makeshift club, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We need to talk," he said, his voice grim. "There are things you need to know about this island." They listened as Nathaniel told his story. He was not a shipwreck survivor, as they had assumed. He was a descendant of the original inhabitants of the island, a people who had once lived in harmony with nature. But then the Siren arrived. She came from the sea, drawn by the island's unique energy. She offered the islanders power and prosperity, but in exchange, she demanded their worship and their obedience. Those who resisted were either killed or transformed into monstrous creatures, like the deep ones and the drowned man. Those who submitted became her loyal servants, their minds enslaved by her song. Nathaniel's ancestors had tried to fight the Siren, but they were ultimately defeated. He was one of the few survivors, living in hiding, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. "I know how to defeat her," he said. "There is a weakness in her power, a vulnerability that can be exploited." He explained that the Siren's power was linked to the full moon. During the lunar cycle, her influence was at its strongest. But there was a brief period, just before the moon reached its zenith, when her power was diminished. During this window of opportunity, it was possible to break her control over the islanders and sever her connection to the land. But it would require a sacrifice, a ritual that had been lost for generations. "I know the ritual," Nathaniel said. "My ancestors passed it down to me in secret, but I cannot perform it alone. I need your help." Marius and Isabella exchanged glances. They knew that this was their only chance to escape the island and defeat the Siren, but it would be a dangerous and desperate gamble. "What do we need to do?" Marius asked, his voice firm. Nathaniel explained that they needed to find a sacred artifact, hidden deep within the island's ancient ruins. The artifact was a stone, said to contain the essence of the island's natural power. Once they had the stone, they needed to bring it to the Siren's grotto and perform the ritual, disrupting her connection to the moon and severing her control over the island. "It will be risky," Nathaniel said. "The Siren will do everything in her power to stop us, but if we succeed, we can free this island from her curse." They agreed to help him. They knew that the odds were stacked against them, but they were determined to fight for their survival and for the freedom of the island. As the full moon began to rise in the sky, they prepared for their final, desperate battle against the Siren. Chapter 7: The Zenith's Fall. The full moon ascended, casting a spectral glow over the island. Nathaniel led Marius and Isabella through the twisted forest, towards the ancient ruins where the sacred stone was hidden. The ruins were crumbling and overgrown, a testament to the Siren's destructive power. They navigated through fallen columns and broken archways, the air thick with an oppressive silence. As they reached the heart of the ruins, they were confronted by a group of islanders, their faces blank and unreadable. They were armed with crude weapons, their eyes fixed on Marius, Isabella, and Nathaniel. "They are under the Siren's control," Nathaniel whispered. "We must fight our way through." They engaged the islanders, their movements swift and decisive. Marius fought with a grim determination, his sword flashing in the moonlight. Isabella used her medical skills to disable her opponents, striking at pressure points and exploiting their weaknesses. Nathaniel wielded his club with savage force, smashing through the islanders' defenses. They fought their way through the ruins, leaving a trail of unconscious bodies in their wake. Finally, they reached their destination, a small chamber, hidden beneath a crumbling altar. Inside the chamber, bathed in moonlight, lay the sacred stone. It was a smooth, obsidian orb, pulsating with a faint energy. Nathaniel reached out and took the stone, his eyes closing in reverence. Suddenly, the Siren's voice echoed through the ruins. "You cannot stop me," she said, her voice laced with fury. "This island belongs to me." The ground began to shake and the ruins began to crumble. The Siren appeared before them, her eyes glowing with an unholy light. She raised her hand, and the islanders rose to their feet, their eyes burning with hatred. "Kill them," she commanded. The islanders surged forward, but Nathaniel stood his ground. He raised the sacred stone above his head, chanting in an ancient language. The stone began to glow brighter, radiating a powerful energy that pushed back the Siren's influence. Marius and Isabella joined Nathaniel, focusing their will on the stone, channeling their energy into its power. The air crackled with electricity, and the ruins began to tremble. The Siren screamed in rage, her power faltering. Her control over the islanders weakened, and they began to break free from her spell. As the moon reached its zenith, Nathaniel performed the final act of the ritual. He smashed the sacred stone against the ground, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. A wave of energy surged outwards, engulfing the island. The Siren shrieked in agony, her body dissolving into mist. Her control over the island was broken. The islanders collapsed to the ground, their minds freed from her influence. The moon's light dimmed, and the island began to fade, sinking back into the sea. Marius, Isabella, and Nathaniel clung to a piece of wreckage, watching as the island disappeared beneath the waves. They had survived the Siren's curse, but they would never forget the horrors they had witnessed. As the sun began to rise, they saw a ship on the horizon. They waved their arms, shouting for help. The ship turned towards them, and they knew that they were finally safe. They had escaped the island, but they carried its secrets with them. They vowed to warn others about the Siren's deadly power, to protect them from her seductive song. They had faced the darkness and they had emerged victorious. But they knew that the Siren was still out there, waiting for her chance to rise again, and they knew that they would be ready when she did. The end.